Welcome, familia. This is the Found in Translation Talk Show. This is Jose Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, familia. This is the Found in Translation Talk Show, the talk show that stacks truth about politics and today's hottest issues. This is, again, your host, Ray Collazo, su servidor, activist, political professional, Philly Rican. And my main purpose with this program is to provide real people the information they need to make informed decisions and have a platform where people from different perspectives, many perspectives you don't get on basic cable or in the corporate media, to give you the real deal about what's going on in Washington, in Puerto Rico, and throughout our country, throughout our world. Again, this is Jose Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, as a podcast, anywhere you can download a podcast, or as a radio program at WPPMOP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia. Hashtag People Powered Media. Later on in the show, we're going to talk about and hopefully get some people live from the rallies, from the actions taking place, the direct actions taking place on the island of Puerto Rico. We're monitoring very closely the activism taking place on the island of Puerto Rico. And we're going to get into in our Thinkable Changes segment. We got all kind of political nuggets for you. We're going to give you some updates on the presidential horse race and a lot of political updates from coast to coast. Who better to have this conversation about what's going on in Washington with the impeachment trials and all this real, meaty political headlines. And we need some real analysis from my people. Who better than one of my dear friends and a fantastic Democratic strategist, un boricua de Aguado, Puerto Rico, papá, Abraham Amoros, Abe Amoros, if you're nasty, Abe. Welcome back to Final Translation, brother.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you, Ralph. Y mi gente también, mi familia.
Seguro que sí. When we get into the Puerto Rican conversation, we're going to break it down for people, because I know me and Abe very much have lived the, how would you say, the conundrum of being Puerto Rican in this country in so many ways. As American as apple pie, de corazón boricua. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that later in a moment. But we got to start, Abe, because what is happening in Washington as we speak is something for the history books. We are indeed going only through the third impeachment trial in our nation's history with President Trump. And it is so clear. Two things are very clear. One is that some very, very inappropriate, to say the least, activities have taken place, not only impeachable and convictable, but this is a moment that truly our future and our democracy is on trial. And so, Abe, who better to have on the show with us, but the Executive Vice President of Policy and Programs, and a woman who not only mentored me in the progressive movement, but also is one of the American experts and people that we look to talk about the importance of the judiciary and the democracy of our country. From People for the American Way, Marge Baker. Marge.
Hi, how you doing?
Welcome to Found in Translation.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great and good to see you.
And people always say, Ray, how did you learn all this stuff about the judiciary, why the Supreme Court is important? How do you know about Robert Bork? How did you get to be Norman Lear? How do you know all these amazing people? And I tell people, Marge Baker and her network at People for the American Way were great mentors for me, and really taught me the importance. And we're going to hopefully touch on this a little bit about voting rights issues and how all of these issues, freedoms, freedom of speech, all these issues are so important to protect our democracy. So, Marge, we're so happy to have you on the show, and thank you so much for your colleague, Lizette Ocampo, for making these arrangements. So, Marge, why don't we just start with, for people that were very busy at work this week or dealing with their children or doing other things, and again, it's in real time. We're dealing with this right as we speak. The trial's taking place. Just catch people up, brief, lay out the week for us. What is taking place this week in Washington? And then we can get into sort of your analysis and you and Abe's analysis as to how this has impacted the potential conviction of President Trump in the Senate.
Right. So thanks for having me on. As folks probably know, late December, the House voted what's called articles of impeachment against President Trump. They charged him with abuse of the power of the presidency, and also with obstructing Congress's investigation into that abuse of power. That happened back in December. Now, what happened this week is a Senate trial on those charges is taking place. And as you said, this is very rare. This is only actually the second trial in U.S. history of an American president. And they're very, very serious charges. As I mentioned, it's abuse of power. And the basic charge there is that what the president did is he shook down, it was a shakedown. He shook down the head of a foreign country to get favors in return that would help him win the 2020 election. So it was a shakedown to get that foreign government to help him and interfere in the current election, the 2020 election that's happening right now. And then the second part of that is he basically stonewalled Congress getting the relevant witnesses and documents they needed. So the second charge is that he obstructed Congress's investigation. And the trial's been going on all this week. And it's been riveting. It's been riveting because the members of the House who are literally prosecuting the case are putting on an incredibly effective case. And I had the opportunity to be there in the Senate gallery to watch today. And everybody was listening. All the senators were listening on both sides of the aisle. Democrats and Republicans were actually listening to this because it's very, very hard to avoid the graphic testimony, the graphic videos that were being shown that helped make the case for the abuse of power.
Marge, can you help share with us, because people that either watch this casually or are, maybe more sympathetic to the president, frankly, are really trying to push a rhetoric of, well, there's slimy things or politically slimy things that we do all the time. Foreign policy is an ugly business. There's always deal making going on, as Mick Mulvaney said, right? Like, get over it. This happens all the time. And then there's sort of a thread of that conversation that says, well, even if you don't like them, the election's 10 months away. Let's just deal with it then. Why do we have to? This doesn't necessarily fall at this moment in history to a conviction, which has never happened in the history of our country. Of course, right. President Nixon, under threat of conviction in the Senate, resigned in disgrace. Right. So, Marge, what's your response to people that bring up that argument to you?
Yeah, so I think there's really two good points. One, on the everybody does it. There's deal making all the time. This was extraordinary what this president did. Yes, you make deals, and you get something in exchange for something. But what the president did here was, it literally was a shakedown. He said to a country that was under threat from the Russians, I'm not going to give you the arms you need. I'm not going to give you a meeting with me that will show the Russians that I am going to protect you unless you do what I want. And what he wanted was not something to help the country. It was something to help him, to give him personal and political advantage, to help him win an election. So this is extraordinary. This is not normal deal making. This is absolutely extraordinary abuse of his power as a president, using his power for him to advantage himself, to help himself, not to advance something that the country cares about. And I'm sorry, your second question, and I've lost it now, was,
well, why, in your opinion, does this rise to the level of a conviction? Because obviously that is a high bar historically.
It is a high bar, and there will be an election coming up. The problem is that the behavior that's in question here, that what he's being challenged with, is actually trying to interfere in the upcoming election. So to say, well, you can cure it with the election is a bit of a problem if what he's doing is trying to steal that election. And so if there were ever a case for removing the president who is abusing his power from office, this is it, because he's abusing his power in order to stay in office so that we don't have fair elections. And that's a problem.
That's right. And it really goes to, and as I like to remind people on the show, you're the historian on this, Marge, more than I am, of course, but that even people that we go to the context of the early 70s, even people that in our day would be considered the far right wing, of the Republican Party, felt a country first ethic, and are the people that went to him in the White House and said, you've got to go. So, Abe, right. I know it's someone that's a longtime political operative. you know the democracy's at stake, and I know this is an issue you're also very passionate about.
No question. What really upsets me is the fact that Congress appropriated the $390 million to aid Ukraine. He intentionally went to the president and said, I will give you this money, but it comes at a price. I need your attorney general to look into the son of the the former vice president, who happens to be my biggest Democratic opponent, who happens to be beating me in every poll head to head, especially in key battleground states. It is egregious. It is insidious at best. And for the Republican Party to hide and say that this is not an impeachable offense, that it is not a criminal offense, maybe it's not a criminal offense, but nothing in the Constitution says that you can be, or you have to be impeached for a criminal offense. They're hiding behind excuses. They're hiding behind ugly politics. And what they're basically doing is they're tying their fortunes to the president and his constituents. And they're sacrificing the values and ideals and the morals of this country for political preservation. And they think they're going to get away with it. Sadly, because there are 53 Republicans in the Senate, they're going to need to sway a handful of Republicans to really be convinced that impeachment is the right way to go. Sadly, I don't see that taking place right now unless they have more evidence, they have more witnesses, and the American public is swayed and call their offices and say, enough is enough. What you're doing is absolutely reprehensible. What you're doing is going to stain this nation for quite some time, and we're not having it. Until that happens, what you're going to see is a continuation of what the Senate is doing. And what really offends me to my core is to see people like Rand Paul sitting in the Senate chamber playing with a crossword puzzle instead of paying attention to the deliberations in the Senate. It's only the third time that this nation has ever seen an impeachment trial. They need to be present. They need to pay attention, and they need to really analyze what is taking place. I was appalled when I learned that few senators actually read the House transcripts. We all probably read more in detail about this case than sitting members of the United States Senate. Think about that for a minute. Think about that. You're one of the most powerful body, one member of the most powerful body in the world, not just the nation, but in the world, because the Senate is an elite club. It's an elite establishment. And for them not to even look at transcripts. Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina said, I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to bother.
Well, it's like they want to keep their head in the sand, because the more they read,
sure,
the less they, the less they can make excuses. Marge, I wanted to get your thoughts on, Abe just brought up a critical point. There's going to be a critical point here after the Trump's lawyers give their arguments, where we're going to have votes, presumably, around whether or not we're going to get witnesses at all, or some of the key witnesses, key documents, what they've already shot down, which Adam Schiff masterfully shared. Like, well, if you want to know the direct sources or really get to the bottom of this, you've just voted against getting access to that. So explain to people what's the next step in the next steps in this process, and why these steps around obtaining evidence are so key. And if you have any thoughts on, do we have 4 Republicans, Marge? That's really kind of the question to vote to get some evidence and get some more information to the American public.
Yeah. So the next steps are, after the House prosecutors, basically House managers, finish their case tomorrow, then the president's lawyers will get to argue. Then the senators will be able to submit questions to be asked of the president's lawyers and/or the House managers. And then you're absolutely right. The question will be called about whether or not there are some key witnesses and key documents that Senator Schumer, the leader of the Senate, the leader of the Democrats in the Senate, has identified are essential to continue to be able to make the case. And it's not clear. In order to prevail, you need 4 Republicans to vote to consider witnesses and documents. And we don't know. I mean, I just saw a statement from Senator Schumer today saying, can I tell you for sure we have the votes? No. Can I tell you for sure we don't have the votes? No. It's very, very close. Now, what's interesting is that all the pressure for a fair trial, for having all the witnesses and documents you need, the ones that were hidden, not shared with the House, the public opinion on this is overwhelmingly in favor of witnesses and documents so you can have a fair trial. 70% of the American public, in fact, 72% of the American public and 69% of Republicans think that the witnesses and documents should be provided. So there are a number of Republican senators who are really struggling with this. If they were honest, their conscience would tell them that they need to have these witnesses and documents. And their constituents are telling pollsters that they want them to get the witnesses and documents. So I think it's going to be a tough question. I think it's quite possible we will get them. And sort of my analogy is, I think we've been talking about head in the sand. It's absolutely right. These extra witnesses and documents are going to remove the sand. There's no way you can keep your head in the sand once these additional witnesses and documents are out there. They can't deny the facts that are out there. And I think it's going to be an interesting vote next week. And it looks like it'll probably be Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. The question will be put to the Senate.
Abe, do you have a question for Marge Baker from People for the American Way discussing? You're watching Found in Translation with Marge Baker from People for the American Way, a great mentor and friend, an expert on judicial and court matters, and Abe Amoros, political strategist, Democratic strategist. Abe, do you have a question for Marge Baker on this issue around the Senate impeachment trial?
Yeah, Marge, I want to get your opinion on whether or not you feel that there's going to be that critical mass and what has to happen with senators such as Susan Collins from Maine, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, and others that you feel might be on the fence. I know that Susan Collins has a very difficult race ahead of her in Maine. And of course, we're still on the heels of what happened with our Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. She has an uphill climb. How do you think this is going to fare in the Granite State?
So this is where activism is so important. And there's Susan Collins, Cory Gardner in Colorado, Joni Ernst in Iowa, Martha McSally in Arizona. There are senators who are feeling very vulnerable. And so what's really important now, and what's happening now, is there's lots of local pressure being mounted at home with these senators saying, you need to vote for a fair trial. And there's sort of a national day of action being organized on Wednesday of next week tied to the vote, where people around the country and here in DC are going to be mobilizing around making sure their senators are hearing from them about supporting a fair trial. And it could very much make a difference. This is where it literally is all about the people power right now. It's about the people, it's about the senators hearing from their constituents, hearing from their voters, that having a fair trial on something as important as this, on something as important as whether or not we should have witnesses and documentation about whether the president is selling out the people for his own personal political gain, whether or not we should have more witnesses on that is really, really critical. So just any way that senators can be contacted, you can call them, you can text them, you can show up at their offices. All of that is really, really, really important right now. And there are a number of senators who I think are really troubled, again, not just on the merits, but on the political consequences from them if they don't vote for a fair trial.
That's right. So we have sort of the first rule of thumb, right, is call your senators. Right. So even if they're Democrats, or even if you think they're not going to be movable, many of the people watching and listening to this are in Pennsylvania. So you have Democrat Robert Casey and Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Pat Toomey, obviously, because they didn't have an election and he's a right-wing guy, probably one of the harder ones to get, but he needs to feel the pressure. He needs to understand that people care about this issue in our community. And this is really a national movement. And then we have obviously the most obvious vulnerable ones, right? The one or two more independent players in the Senate, like Senator Murkowski in Alaska, Senator Romney in Utah. We have a couple people that are very vulnerable, particularly from a Latino perspective, that Latinos have a lot of impact on their future, like Senators Gardner in Colorado and Senator McSally in Arizona. For my people, you need to be reaching out to them very strongly. And then, of course, Susan Collins in Maine and Earth and a few other of the potential swing members. Marge, can you share with people?
Also,
yes, please jump in.
One other point. The point you made about calling your senators, even if you think they're not movable, is really, really important because these senators talk to one another, right? So if you don't think Toomey's movable, but if Toomey's in talking to his colleagues and saying, my phone's ringing off the hook, that makes a difference. So the sense of momentum, the sense of pressure right now is critical.
That's right. And Abe, do you have any final questions for Marge Baker from People for the American Way around these issues?
Yeah, I wanted to ask how she sees the Latino vote making a difference in some of those swing states and whether or not they're going to basically pay attention to the voice of the people as it relates not just to this issue, but other issues such as healthcare, education, the environment, equal access, income equality. Do you think that the Latino vote is going to be more critical this year than it has before?
Oh, I think this is so critical this year. It's absolutely so critical this year. I mean, number one, just the power of the vote is really, really important. But also, all those issues you describe have really impacted the Latino community, and so it's extremely important for the senators to hear, when we get to it, the presidential candidates to understand the impact of all of these horrific policies on the Latino community, and to be making clear that the Latino community is going to vote its interests, and that's really, 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 really important.
Marge, we want to thank you so much. Before we let you go, we want to make sure we give you the opportunity to share anything else you'd like to share about either the impeachment trial, the ongoing work People for the American Way is doing around voter protecting our vote, election protection, and maintaining our democracy. So many critical issues all these issues around supporting Latino and minority voting rights is a big part of this conversation, because we'll be the ones that get suppressed in the cheating if that happens, right? If he's allowed to get away with this. So let people know what else you'd like to share with us and what else People for the American Way is doing to address these issues.
Sure. So 2 points I'd really like to leave folks with. One is that this impeachment proceeding is fundamentally about voting rights. Because as we've discussed, what this was about is the president trying to rig the 2020 election and using the power of his office, abusing the power of his office to do that. So this impeachment issue is really all about voting rights. And so there's so many other issues wrapped up in voting rights. We do a lot of work in terms of trying to have fair courts and assure a fair judiciary that respects voting rights. And it's really concerning to me that the next president of the United States is going to be nominating people to sit on the courts for life. And those courts decide really, really critical voting issues. They decide really critical issues around the census. They decide really critical issues around healthcare. So understanding that who the president is affects who sits on the courts to make these really incredibly important decisions, and also who sits in the Senate to confirm these judges makes a huge difference. So the stakes could not be higher right now in both the presidential election and also in the Senate elections on issues that really, really, really impact our communities, that really impact voting rights, that really impact our ability to have a democracy that serves all of us, not just corporations, the powerful, the wealthy, the privileged.
Marge, I want to thank you, first of all, for your mentorship, your longtime friendship, and support for not only myself personally, but sort of these new generations of Latino leaders, of course, culminating with the kind of leadership you provided that young woman that works with you, Lisette Ocampo, and other it's
Yes.
Latinx staff. She's fantastic, and the rest of your team. And I want to make sure, I'm so glad that someone from the PFAW family is here, because oftentimes there were times in our history where people like you and me and our great friends at PFAW and the progressive movement, we were thought of as like exaggerators and dramatic.
Yeah.
Democracy's not going anywhere. The country's not going anywhere. Things are fine. You two, everybody's always, oh, why do you have to be so politically correct? Why do you have to be so, sensitive? And it was for these kind of moments. It was to realize that if you let norms in our Constitution erode slowly and rights, we could get to a moment like this where literally the democracy is on the line. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime that we would be in this position, but at the same time, it affirms to me why we have to continue to do this work when we don't feel like we're in crisis, and maintain that mission. Marge, I want to thank you for all you've done for our country.
Well, thank
all
you,
you've done for me personally. This has been a great conversation.
Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And that was Marge Baker from People for the American Way. Marge Baker, again, when I was a sort of relatively new to the national scene, really took me under her wing, and really has been a great standard bearer for the progressive movement in this country. Abe, made a lot of line here, brother. I mean, I never thought, when you're a little kid, the Nixon stuff happened like you were a baby. I was a few months before I was born. Yeah. And, I never thought we would be in a moment of more crisis. And it turns out it's much more serious and much more egregious than anything Nixon ever did. It's unbelievable.
It's worse than what any other president has done. I get so tired of listening to my Republican colleagues say, or my Republican friends say, you know what? This is not impeachable. This is not that serious. Every politician does this. No, not every politician does this. This man has zero respect for the fundamental institutions of this country. This man has no respect for democracy. This man didn't even know the significance of Pearl Harbor when he visited the site. This man has no respect for anything that's truly American. Democracy is dying under this man because he refuses to understand how critical and important it is. He has no respect for governing. He has no respect for elected officials, appointed officials. He has no respect for anybody but himself. He is one of the most narcissistic individuals that's ever been elected to the White House. And we have to do everything possible to remove him from office in 2020. Everything.
Amen, Papa. And from a Latino perspective, you talking about going backwards and illegality that has taken place against our community. I mean, we don't even know, and we won't know. Unfortunately, we may not know for many years until those young people have a voice of their own that they can tell their story around the atrocities that took place in the southern border, continue to take place. I don't know if you saw, Abe, 9 parents in Guatemala were flown into LAX to be reunited with their kids after 2 years when they were illegally denied the opportunity for asylum claims. And it's been shown with this with the funding issues related to the disaster relief in Puerto Rico, which we're going to talk about now.
Yeah,
that the U.S. government and HUD specifically withheld hundreds of millions of dollars illegally for U.S. citizens. Disaster relief.
Right.
Think about that, people. Disaster relief.
And let me add something else, Ralph. They did it to American citizens, United States citizens. We are United States citizens according to the Jones Act of 1917. I am tired of listening to people making comments that we are different as Puerto Ricans. We are not. We're American citizens.
That's right. And Abe, you're going to let people know how they can subscribe to the show, and then we'll bring out our special guest.
That's right. You can subscribe to the Found in Translation Talk Show by liking Ray's podcast page on Facebook or YouTube, or by subscribing to the Found in Translation Talk Show podcast anywhere you can subscribe to a podcast like iTunes, Stitcher, Radio Public, Spotify, or Pandora. And for our radio listeners, you can also listen to Found in Translation every Tuesday at 11 a.m. on WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much, Abe Amoros, and you're listening to the Found in Translation Talk Show with your host, Ray Collazo, and today's co-host, Abe Amoros, who's a Democratic political strategist. We're getting to all the political stuff in a minute.
Yeah.
But we wanted to bring on, we are monitoring because you're not going to get it, unfortunately, on basic cable. You're not going to get it even to the extent you need to in the national Spanish media. And there are not enough outlets focusing on the ongoing crises. There's many of them in many levels going on the island of Puerto Rico. And the latest news, and we're going to have our very special guest who's on the front lines who's going to share with us in a second. The latest news relating to the shameful discovery that there were warehouses of goods that had been earmarked for disaster relief for Hurricane Maria 2 years ago, that our people in the community were able to find, and now has renewed the call for hashtag Wanda Renuncia. We have a person who's just become a good friend to the show, Abe, who's on the ground in Puerto Rico, an activist, a teacher, who's going to give us his updates from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and a city council candidate for the city of San Juan, Paul Figueroa. Paul, bienvenido. Buenas noches, hermano.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
So, Paul, just jump right in. Let us know what's happening now in San Juan. What have you been a part of today?
So today I was with Mercedes. Mercedes llegó a Puerto Rico, so I'm.
Qué
right
bueno.
now.
Saluda a Mercedes.
Yeah. She's with David Begnard right now. I'm sitting outside. You know how she is. Pues today there was a Wanda Renuncia protest. The march from the Capitol building over to La Fortaleza. All this week there's been protests every night in front of La Fortaleza calling on Wanda Vázquez to resign in the similar fashion that it was with Ricky Rosselló, that they've been very organic. They haven't been convoked by political organizations. It's been citizens saying, hey, you know what, at this time we're going to get together, we're going to meet up, and we're going to work to get Wanda out, because Wanda originally said that she didn't know anything about the suministro, the aid that was being put in those warehouses. She said she knew nothing about it. Then she said they were 7. Then she said they were 13. Then documents came out that said that she signed off on the rent for these warehouses. So the government was paying $10,000 a month for each one of these warehouses.
Wow.
And these documents came out that she had signed it. And then today in a press conference, she said, well, everybody knew about it this whole time. So my question is, well, if everybody knew about it, how come now it's this big deal? Or everybody knew about it, does that mean the political class knew about it, the people behind the chat knew about it, but they hid it from all of us? So protests against her have been going on all week. As you know, I'm a candidate within the Puerto Rican Independence Party, Partido Independentista Puertorriqueño, and our spokesperson in the Puerto Rican Senate introduced a bill today calling for changes to our Constitution in order for there to be a transition process when we have situations like now, where Ricky was taken out in July, then we have Pierluisi, now we have Wanda. For elections to be held in 90 days in a moment of political crisis like this, so that the people have the power to get rid of the governor, so that when no majority wins, that there can be a second round to the elections. And our government right now does not permit, our Constitution right now does not permit minority parties to form coalitions, and allowing the ability for coalitions to happen in the Puerto Rican legislature. Because what happened is Ricky Rosselló won the governorship with only 40% of the vote. So 6 out of 10 Puerto Ricans didn't even want him there in the first place. And now you have this political crisis happening. So there needs to be a change to the Constitution. And in the PEEP, we've been daily out in the protests and in the halls of the legislature trying to make sure that these needed changes to our Constitution happen.
So, Paul, you're listening to Paul Figueroa on the ground in San Juan, Puerto Rico, letting us know how the people are feeling and reacting to this latest scandal that we found out that there was goods that presumably the governor now has admitted that they were aware of that were never distributed to the people of Puerto Rico. Of course, this is in the midst of another natural disaster with the ongoing earthquakes. Paul, ¿cómo se siente la gente en Puerto Rico, hermano? I mean, how are people feeling around these revelations? And I mean, there's a mix of exhaustion, but also a renewed spirit, because the activism from Residente to the baseball players to Ricky Martin's going to come from is coming to the island to Lo Gente Humilde on the island is unprecedented.
I think it's a collective anger. We're angry. It's at the protests in La Fortaleza Tuesday and the protests today. activist groups have put a full-size guillotine in front of the governor's mansion. It's in anger, and in Viejo San Juan, you know, it's a tourist area, and as tourists have come by and spoken about asked me, you know, what are you protesting for? What's going on? And every time I explain, you know, it's a result of this natural disaster and the government's inability to respond to the crisis, I get angry again every time I talk about it. It's the I've read in different newspaper articles, journalists have called this the wound that doesn't heal. And I think it's exactly that. It's that every time that something related to this crisis, a scandal related to this crisis comes up, it brings up all of these wounds, all these trauma from the hurricane and now with the earthquakes that we haven't dealt with yet.
Abe, do you have a question for Paul?
Yes, I do. Paul, I want to know if the people of Puerto Rico believe that the governor should resign as a result of this. Déjame decirte, yo estoy sentado aquí en Harrisburg, congelado, pero hirviendo con un coraje, absolutamente encabronado con lo que está pasando en Puerto Rico. I am just absolutely overwhelmed. I can only imagine what the people of Puerto Rico who are on the island are thinking. What are your thoughts?
I'm very angry. I'm very angry that this is happening. I'm not surprised that it's happening, and that's something I was saying to people today in the PIP. We've been denouncing all of these things for a very long time, and we've been saying that this corruption is happening, it's happening, it's happening, and now it's public information, right? So for me, it's been, we've known it all this time, and now this information is widely known. But I think there's a lot of uncertainty as well. That in Puerto Rico, there's always been this fear of other Latin American countries, the instability in other Latin American countries. And if we get rid of Wanda now, it'll have been like 4 or 5 governors in 1 year. And so there's a lot of people saying, there's a lot of people taking the streets, there's a lot of people manifesting their anger in the streets, but then there's a lot of people saying, well, let's just wait until November. So right now you see the island is in between these two camps of let's get her out right now, and then people saying, yeah, she's horrible, let's get rid of Wanda, but let's wait until November.
Paul,
Truly,
yes. Yeah. Abe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yep.
Okay, I'm having some video challenges, so continue, Abe. Ask your final question to Paul.
Paul, listen. I was in Puerto Rico back in March with a nonprofit organization called Casa of Pennsylvania. We went down there to talk to Fidel Cosimo, which is a nonprofit in San Juan, and we also had the opportunity to sit down with members of the Independence Party, which seems to be picking up a lot of momentum because the corruption in Puerto Rico right now is being spread equally between both parties, and I believe that your party has a real chance of making significant progress, especially this year. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that and why that is key in 2020.
The vice president of our party, Maria de Lourdes Santiago, she said in a debate in 2016 that every political party in Puerto Rico has had people go to jail. And that is true. People from every political party have gone to jail. But the people from the PNP and the PPD, they go to jail when they steal from the people. And the people from the PIP, we go to jail when we defend the country, when we defend our homeland. And we've been the party that was there in Vieques, that got the U.S. Marine out of Vieques. Maria de Lourdes was arrested in Peñuelas to fight against the ashes when she blocked the entrance of trucks dumping toxic ashes. I've gotten billy clubbed by police officers fighting against teachers' pension cuts, and that's what the PIP does. So and I've been speaking about that continually over the past few weeks. Is who are the people you want in power? The people that have been there defending you all this whole time, or the people that have been going to prison for years and years for stealing from you? And people now are starting to see that, hey, these are the people that have always been there for us, you know? We have the emergence of a new political party that's also on an anti-corruption platform.
Yes.
But I think people now are really more receptive to the messages of alternative political parties. in the PIB, the majority of our candidates in 2020 are women, are millennials, and are part of the LGBT community too. And Puerto Rico, even though it's traditionally more conservative, we're seeing with the new generation and the changing times, the more openness to female representation in government, to LGBT representation in government. And we're the people leading that charge, and we're representing all the communities in Puerto Rico that have been traditionally marginalized. And I think now there is a lot more openness to that, and I think that this election year will be a favorable year for us.
Paul, this is Ray Collazo, and it's a little weird. I'm not on screen, but you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. I wanted to know, you're a 7th grade school teacher. You teach in our schools in Puerto Rico. How was it for your students this week? Share with us how they're feeling and how was it getting back in the classroom with them?
It was. I asked all my students today, how are you feeling after the earthquakes and everything, and they said, teacher, we've been told that the school buildings aren't safe. The school where I work at's been inspected twice and it's been certified safe. And they're like, but you know what? If an earthquake's going to happen, it's going to happen. And what can we do about it? I think they're resigned to a negative outcome, that everything that they've heard in the media is that, the schools aren't safe, that the architecture here isn't safe. So they're just, and it's horrible to see 12 and 15-year-olds say, well, if it's our time to go, it's our time to go. And teenagers, typically, that's the response to a lot of things anyway. But it was very disheartening to hear that. And that the students said, well, and I said to the students, I'm going to be doing a couple interviews. What do you want people to know? And they're like, well, let them know that we're okay. If it happens, it happens. But that's not the mentality that we should let our teenagers have.
No, absolutely. And so Paul Figueroa, activist, teacher on the island of Puerto Rico and candidate for City Council of San Juan. Felicidades. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your activism. Saludada, Mercedes. And, of course, David Begnan, the patron saint of the island. And please keep us posted on the Wanda Renuncia movement and anything else you'd like to share with our Found in Translation listeners. Felicidades, papás. Cuídate, okay?
Muchas gracias.
All right. So, seguro que sí. Thank you so much for Paul Figueroa. And I know it's a little weird talking to me in the dark here, Abe, but we're going to plunge through here for the last 13 minutes of the show. You're listening and watching the Found in Translation Talk Show. You're watching Abe. He's better looking anyway. So you can check out Amoros. But it doesn't matter for the podcast listeners. So we're having some technical difficulties. We want to make sure that we are able to hit some of these other topics we wanted to get to. In the Tengo Bochincha segment, we got to talk a little politics, Abe.
Politics.
It's been an interesting development because the last several polls in this Democratic primary appear that Bernie Sanders has surged ahead, not only in the national polls, but in Iowa. And even there was a poll that came out, Steve Kornacki said on MSNBC this morning, they had a poll of that Bernie is leading amongst minority voters at this point, slightly ahead of Joe Biden. So what do you make of these polls? Do you think this is real? And how are you handicapping the next few weeks leading up to the Iowa caucus?
Well, Ralph, you and I have had discussions offline on several occasions regarding the polls. And I do think that Iowa is important. It's only 11 days away. But I think that this is going to start in earnest in South Carolina. I do believe that the polls right now are just a snapshot of what it's like on January the 23rd. People are still not paying attention as much as we would like them to. In fact, studies will show that people think about politics no more than 5 minutes per week, and that's not a continuous 5 minutes. Now, we can get excited about Bernie. We can get excited about other candidates. I personally, and you know this, I'm a Biden guy. I think Biden has been steady. I think Biden represents normalcy. He's not going to set the world on fire. He's going to make some gaffes. He's going to make some mistakes. He's going to act like that goofy uncle from time to time. But it is a significant improvement over what we have in office today. Bernie has some great ideas. Elizabeth has some great ideas. And interestingly enough, Ralph, while we're talking about polls, let's not forget that the top 5 contenders in the Democratic presidential nomination race are beating Trump head to head between 3 and 12%. That's key. The other thing that people are not talking about right now is how independents are swinging. 55% of independents that were polled recently want to see Trump impeached. That's huge. And anecdotally, let me just say this, anecdotally, I know a lot of people who regretted their vote for Donald Trump, but I don't know of a single person who voted for Hillary Clinton who said, I think I'm going to vote for Donald Trump this time. Not a single one. Show me that person and I'll show you a unicorn. It just doesn't exist. So, bro, I got to tell you, these numbers are interesting. They're fodder. All right, we've got 11 days until the Iowa caucuses.
Tell you what.
Everybody's tripping over each other to see who's in the lead right now. But you know what? Let me just throw a little cold water here on things. All right. In 2012, Rick Santorum won the Iowa caucuses. Rick Santorum is an analyst on CNN. He's not anywhere near elected office. So we have to put all of this in perspective. It is a snapshot of today. The primary election in Pennsylvania is April the 28th. That's the one that's really going to matter. I think this thing will be over before that, quite frankly. But, brother, let me just say, everybody needs to chill until the South Carolina primary.
Okay, so very convenient. Very convenient. It's very convenient that you say it starts where your boy's the only place he's strong. Just keep it real on that. So let me ask you a question. This is kind of the bottom line, right? In many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Is that hypothetically, Bernie wins Iowa, Bernie wins New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. Let's say Biden finishes third in both. Mm-hmm. Could that be enough to sway, to not only show what many are saying boils down to older African-American voters in South Carolina, to prove to them that, hey, Bernie's got viability too. And so I guess my question to you is there a scenario in your mind where strong showing of Bernie in the top two states and all that momentum and it could change the dynamics that we currently have in South Carolina? Not only against Biden, but also maybe bringing a Steyer or Bloomberg into it or what have you. I mean, that could mix up the whole race, you know?
Kudos to Tom Steyer and kudos to Michael Bloomberg for investing significant resources in states, hiring workers. In Pennsylvania alone, Mike Bloomberg hired more than 100 people. And he told them, Ralph, your job is secure till the end of the year. Steyer could do the same with his billions. Because more importantly, they know that they are fringe candidates. They know that their spotlight, that the warmth of the spotlight is going to start wearing off very soon. But they know that they can make a significant difference in terms of defeating Donald Trump in the fall.
Okay, so what you're saying is, mm-hmm. you believe. Let's get you on the record here, Abe. You believe that regardless of the results in Iowa, New Hampshire, even a worst case scenario, you believe Biden's support not only in South Carolina, mm-hmm. but in those larger Super Tuesday states would hold, because history doesn't necessarily. I mean. Usually it holds if it's a split decision with the first couple states. And I'm only saying that only because other than Warren or Buttigieg, Sanders does, to the polling, to the organizing we're seeing, particularly in California, Sanders does have some inroads in minority communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's no doubt. I mean, listen, this is his second go around. He has an established ground game. He has an organization that is very formidable. He's able to raise money. But when things start to get really hot and heavy, I do think that Biden is going to be able to draw not just on his network, but don't forget President Obama's network as well. In 2020 is going to come out heavy. Yeah,
but President Obama didn't endorse him. President Obama didn't endorse him, bro. President Obama, you know, Kayal, he was hoping on some level Harris or Beto stepped up. You know, he's provided Buttigieg's people. It's like he's hedging his bets here. Now, you are correct. I'm not trying to be tough on Joe. I'm not. You are correct in that two things. One, there is a lot of reporting that Obama's very concerned about Sanders potentially winning his nomination.
Sure,
so it's possible that if it does boil down to which appears like it's going to. I mean, if you had to bet on it, it looks like there's going to be a Biden-Sanders race at this point. That even though I don't think Bloomberg's totally out of the money, frankly, that maybe Obama then puts his foot on the scales at that point, right? That's possible, right?
Of course.
Um,
There's no doubt about it. Right.
yeah, but then the other, so I just wonder though. I guess my point is there's no consensus candidate at all here. At best, Sanders is coalescing the progressive wing, which obviously is not good for Warren.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, does that give Bloomberg, because we're starting to see Steyer even gain some traction in South Carolina, does that give Bloomberg a window to get in the mix? Who knows? Let me ask you a question, Abe. Let me ask you a question, Abe. Do you feel there's two things that happened the last couple of days, which were very intriguing, that but it's questionable to see how they impact the race? The first one was the New York Times did this odd, unprecedented move by endorsing both Senator Warren and Senator Klobuchar, sort of as, hey, we'll give you two flavors that we prefer, depending if you like vanilla or chocolate.
Okay.
And then, sort of the moderate option of the progressive. And then Hillary Clinton came out hating on Bernie.
All right.
So how do you think these dynamics? And then the other thing is we got the senators stuck at the impeachment trials. So half of them aren't able to campaign. So how do you think these factors are impacting the mix here in the last few weeks, those different headlines?
That's a three-pronged question. Let me address each of those points one at a time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Time is yours, my friend.
Okay. The first thing you asked about was Bernie Sanders and his ability to really get people behind him going into the stretch. People are going to be reminded that even though he caucuses with the Democratic Party, he is still a democratic socialist. That's going to come out. People are going to be frightened by that label at some point as we move into the election. The second point I want to make is that newspaper endorsements haven't meant a whole lot since the 40s. They're wonderful to read. People like you and me eat them up word for word. We repeat them when they're beneficial to us. When they're not as beneficial, we say things like newspaper endorsements haven't meant anything since the 40s.
Abe, when you ran for city council in York, PA, did you get endorsed by the York paper?
I did. Yes, I was endorsed. Endorsed.
And I was endorsed by the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yes, you were.
When I ran for state house.
And
we're both sitting in our living rooms talking politics. So
yes, and you ran a magnificent race. And to my core, I think you should be the state representative from that district. I
appreciate you, brother. I appreciate you,
The third thing you were talking about was Hillary. I wish Hillary would just go away. She should just go away. Leave the 2020 race to the 2020 candidates. That may tick off a lot of my friends, but I'm just being honest and I'm keeping it real. Because right now we have no time for dissension. The fact that we have not coalesced around one candidate and those five are still beating Donald Trump head to head, that should scare a lot of Republicans. Because once we do have one candidate, and let me just go on record by saying this, Ralph, if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, I will be out there working for Bernie Sanders. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm going to put the cause ahead of anything else, my personal beliefs, my feelings. The first thing I'd like him to do is to switch parties and become a Democrat. Too much to ask if you're running as the Democratic nominee.
That's a fair point.
I'm just old-fashioned, bro. You know what I'm saying? Maybe I'm just old-fashioned.
Let me mention something, Abe, that'll make you feel better. And again, we keep it real here on Found in Translation Talk Show. There's Jose Collazo and Abe Amoros. For people watching the video version of the show, I don't know, there's something going on with my camera. So you're seeing Abe and you're seeing me and you're hearing me, but that's okay. So, and of course, long time, and for my money, one of the best political operatives and analysts, Democratic political analysts in the country, Abe Amoros, here with Found Translation. Abe, I was in Washington this week, and before I went to my meetings, which were blocks away from where this impeachment trial was taking place, I saw Joe Biden on Morning Joe. live. And I thought Joe Biden, I thought it was the best moment in the campaign. I thought he was, although he fumbled on certain things, I think at the end of the day, he showed his strength, his gravitas on the issues, particularly the foreign policy stuff. I thought he handled this nonsense with his son very well. He brought back his other son into the conversation, talking about the sacrifice his family's made, not only with him in public service, but of course the ultimate sacrifice, eventually losing his son after he served military service. And so much love and rest in peace to Beau Biden. And the humanity he showed in that conversation is what's drawn, and that strength, in that realness, and that dedication to public service is what draws all of us to Joe over the years.
Right.
And so I guess what we all want is more of that in Joe, and showing that kind of humanity, and also showing that he's kind of with the kids, that he is willing to sort of, engage in new ideas and new ways of doing things that aren't so the old DC. So I don't know if you saw the interview, but I know that's the Joe Biden you support. And I wanted to make sure people understood that we call it as we see it. And I thought on the Morning Joe program this week, Joe Biden had his finest moment of this campaign.
Yes, he did, Ralph. And you hit the nail on the head, because he keeps it real. He's like this. There might be a bleep or a bloop there, a mistake. But we all make mistakes, especially public officials. And no one is perfect, obviously, but the man genuinely cares. When you talk to him, when you have a conversation with him, you feel that warmth. And you say, Coño, this guy's all right. This guy, he feels me, or at least I feel he feels me right now. I've had many, many conversations with Joe Biden over the years. In fact, in 1990, when I was the vice president of the College Democrats of America, I even had a conversation with Beau Biden, who was at the University of Pennsylvania. I was at Penn State. He was at the University of Pennsylvania. We had a nice discussion about working together and getting involved in College Dem. So may he rest in peace. But Joe is real. And what you see is what you get. And you're going to get a flawed candidate, and you're going to get a flawed person. But at the end of the day, he has a fundamental respect and acceptance for who you are as a human being. The parasite we have in the White House right now has no respect for anybody but himself. I truly believe that SOB would even throw members of his own family under the bus to preserve.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. His son-in-law, he put him in jail. He put him in jail for him. There's no question about it.
Sure he would.
No question about it. Abe, I appreciate the passion, brother. And it's been interesting because around the holidays, I think people have started to pay more attention, and I'm getting more questions, which is good. People want to know some of the newer players. There's kind of this, Yang Gang, Andrew Yang sort of has an intriguing profile and some intriguing ideas. I found a lot of people. I was with a lot of people this week that were saying how much they didn't want to like them, but they're starting to like Steyer and Bloomberg more than they would have initially thought. Obviously, two different personas, and obviously, sort of buying their way on the stage. Somebody texted me the other day and said, "Hey, Steyer's looking good up there." And I said, "Let me tell you something, brother. If me or Abe Ambrose had 50 billion, we'd be killing it on the debate stage too." Yeah. So, the idioma, we'd be killing it up there. We'd be killing it.
You know why? Everybody's a sucker for a rich guy with a heart and compassion. Everybody.
There's no question about that. There's no question about it.
2 words for you. 2 words. Tom Wolf.
Absolutely. Our Pennsylvania governor, who's a good brother. Speaking of that, Abe, in the Tengo Chincha segment, got any gossip, man? Any political tidbits you wanted to share with our Founding Translation community?
Yes. Well, speaking just in Pennsylvania here, the Speaker of the House, by the name of Mike Turzai, today announced that he was not going to seek re-election for his House seat. He is a Speaker of the House. He's going to get a job working in the private sector. He's single-handedly stopped the severance tax from taking place in Pennsylvania. He single-handedly stopped legislation on minimum wage. He single-handedly pushed for the privatization of the state stores. I say good riddance to the Speaker and his ilk. So that's a little bit of bochinche that popped up today, as a matter of fact, in Pennsylvania. And as you know, this is going to be a big state and a big year in terms of winning back the state House of Representatives, making inroads in the state Senate, and giving Governor Tom Wolf, a liberal progressive Democrat, some tools and the wherewithal to pass some progressive legislation moving forward. So that's my bochinche for the state of Pennsylvania that I think everybody should be aware of.
Torzai's a bad dude, and
Yo.
there's an unprecedented for people that know. Basically, this is the year that basically is the most important state legislative cycle in a decade, because this is the group, this is the body, the chamber dynamic that will determine redistricting, and we're going to have lots of episodes to talk about that possibility. Pennsylvania may hold serve or maybe lose a congressional seat, and of course, you know, the gerrymandering that's taking place in the state house level, state senate level, has really put the screws on Latinos gaining political power in the state in particular, and Democrats at large. I got 3 names for you here, Abe. 3 names, actually 4, but we'll get to the local guy last. I got 3 names for you. The name Mara Candelaria Reardon, Christina Hale, and Michelle de la Isla. These are 3 women, Latinas, that have announced they're running for Congress, for congressional seats in the Midwest. Mara and Christina in Indiana. Mara's running for the Rudy Lopez part of Indiana, our old friend in Northwest Indiana. Boricua Mexicana, was the first Latina ever in the Indiana Assembly. And Michelle de la Isla, mayor of Topeka, Kansas, Abe. Boricua.
We're
Michelle,
everywhere.
we are everywhere, brother. She don't play. The reason they came up is that they were endorsed this week by the Latino Victory Fund. The Latino Victory Fund is the PAC, Political Action Committee, that was founded by the Obama donors, the Latinos of wealth that put a lot of money into the Obama campaign. Names like Eva Longoria and other celebrities are part of that mix. So we wanted to honor those 3 Latinas. I want to give a shout out to my young boy, former head of the Pennsylvania Young Dems, Andre Del Valle, who announced he's thrown his hat in the ring for the 175th state legislative district of Pennsylvania, representing the Fishtown area in Philadelphia. So we'll engage Andre and the ladies in their congressional runs. Abe, one of the things that's so exciting about this year, even though it's horrifying, the consequences of it, and I've been telling people, is that there's going to be a lot of new leaders, a lot of new players that come to the States, particularly from our community, particularly younger, more diverse voices. And stepping up in leadership is going to be a big theme in 2020 for all of us.
That's exactly right. We have to understand that power is not given. You have to grab it for yourself. And you've got to have a lot of confidence in yourself. You've got to work very hard. Power is taken, it's never given. And even though we work with well-intended constituency groups, we have to understand that we have to do this for ourselves. And if we don't stick up for ourselves as Latinos, and if we don't demand equal access, then we're not going to be taken seriously, and we will let our own community down. Let's not do that. Let's become that force, that thunderbolt of change in 2020, because we can do it.
It's so interesting, Abe. That's so appropriate that we end this conversation, this episode of Found Translation, with that comment, because, well, thinking about most directly and most on mind what's happening in Puerto Rico as we speak, an unprecedented level of activism at arguably our lowest point in 100 years as a community, in terms of the natural disasters, the cumulative effect of the debt and the economic downturns over the last few decades. But this renewed spirit of activism and hope and doing things for ourselves, to the point you just made. And also thinking about that, you know, in some ways we have gone backwards as a country. Never thought we would be at the crossroads of saving our democracy in my lifetime, certainly. And in some ways we have changed things. We have changed things incredibly quicker than I ever thought. I never thought my children, before they got out of kindergarten, will have experienced a black president. I certainly would have thought I would have had one in my adult life, frankly. So things can change, and we can be the force for those changes, and we have no idea how much power we have if we unlock it, take the courage to take that step, and step up to leadership, like this young man that just was on the show, Paul Figueroa, who's
Yes.
literally on his own personal time, not only running for office, but taken to the streets in the Wanda Renuncia movement, like Marge Baker, who's dedicated her life to protecting the sanctity of our courts and our democracy, who's, could easily be in retirement, living large in Florida someplace, and she's literally at the Senate chambers this morning, observing and protecting our democracy. So we are the agents of those change, and we have to stay involved, step up in leadership, and take our rightful place in our society. I want to thank Marge Baker from People for the American Way, Paul Figueroa from the island of Puerto Rico, chiming in live, and everyone that Felix Montelara, Margaret Brewer, and other Tiny Perez who chimed in on the chat. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the Found Translation Talk Show. Abe, you're gonna be a regular, brother. You're a natural in this business.
I'm around. You know where to find me, bro.
I hear you, brother. And the little birdie told me we're gonna be hooking up on Tuesday to do some business. Business. And if y'all are lucky out there in the Found Translation community, you might find out about that on a upcoming Tengo Bochincha segment. Thank you, brother. We'll see each other soon, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining Found Translation. Subscribe and download the podcast version of the show. Subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on social media at FIT_talk show, or check us out on WPPM Radio 106.5 FM in Philadelphia. The city loves you back. Thank you, brother. See you soon.
All right. Take care.